you do if you were wondering how you could be more successful as a team? Would you just have people join your company? Or would you want them to join a crusade? Well, David Burkus says that the goal to get great teams finding a purpose is to pick a fight, to find a purpose that's worth rallying around. And we're going to talk about that today. Fascinating enough, this book is only available in audio. And the way David tells the story, I got to tell you, even if you don't like audiobooks, it is fantastic. This is the third time David's been on the show, and I'm excited that he's here. We were talking about pro wrestling before. Is that the kind of fight you're talking about, David, or what kind of fight are we talking about here?
Sure, why not? Why not? By the way, I love how excited you are to give that intro, because I saw you hitting your desk and your whole camera shaking. I loved it.
I had to do that. This is awesome.
And that proves my point. So, I mean, at the core of this idea, when I talk about a fight, I'm not talking about the way you fight your competitors. I'm not talking about rivalries. Those actually very rarely motivate anyone other than consumers. Your employees know they might go to work for a competitor one day anyway. What I'm talking about is that deeper thing worth fighting for. I'm talking about that crusade, that revolution, that reformation. We talk a lot in the last 10 or 15 years about purpose. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of leaders still don't know how to know if they have a purpose that will actually motivate. And so that was the reason we picked this idea of picking a fight. Can your people answer the question, what are we fighting for? Right? It's not enough to say, what do we do here? But can they answer the question, what are we fighting for? If we can, then you've got a pretty solid and pretty motivating purpose.
And sadly, most can't. Right?
No,
that's the real truth, right? We're fighting to beat our competition because, they're just bad. Or we're fighting to gain market share or some other BS thing. I mean, I think your mission statement assessment that you offer folks is super interesting, right? One of the resources from the book is this mission statement assessment, right? How do we look at this and unify, direct, and motivate beyond this assessment? So before we even get into that, David, I got to hear, man. So why now? Why is now the right time for this book? Because I really think that it is.
Yeah, well, some of the timing here I had nothing to do with, right? We were talking before we recorded about the way that the sort of the outside adversity that we are all facing is kind of bonding people together. I mean, there are things going on in terms of 4 days ago, we would talk about how divisive our politics in America are. And 4 days later, they're a lot more unified than they used to be. And the reason is this idea of what in psychology literature is called a superordinate goal. Right? That when you can take people who are very opposed to each other, but you can point to some other external threat, some other external adversity, or some other positive thing worth fighting for, some superordinate goal, something that requires interdependence, and the lack of accomplishing that threatens the way of life for multiple different people, you see them bond much faster than any sort of team building activity, right? This isn't trust falls and ropes courses. This is, if we don't get together, this bright future will not happen and this dark one will take over. And that merges people a lot faster. But, as we talked about this idea that for leaders, when you ask that question, what are we fighting for? Unfortunately, too many of them are still answering in one of two ways. Either they're doing what you said, the market share thing, and they're saying we're fighting this or that. And that might motivate you at the senior level, it might motivate customers, but it doesn't motivate frontline employees. Or the thing that they'll do that's arguably worse is they'll point to the mission statement, right? Which is this multi-sentence word salad thing about shareholder value and innovation and excellence, and most people don't even remember it, right? I know. I since the book came out, I've been talking to some CEOs will admit they don't even know what their mission statement is, right? And so, to me, that is the big kind of litmus test. That's the goal, right? You can keep your mission statement if you want, if it provides that answer that, as you said, unifies, motivates, and directs. If it makes it look like, yes, this is the revolution that we're about, or this is the underdog fight that we're taking on, or these are the people that we serve, so because we know that their lives are a fight. Those are the things that actually motivate people, that stir men's souls. Shareholder value is not one of them.
Oh, come on. I just want to synergize and create value and all this. No, that's total bunk, right? I mean, that isn't inspiring.
No, it's not. There's a Weird Al song. You can see the video on YouTube. We'll have to I'll post it. I'll go back on this and post it in the comments. But he actually wrote a song called Mission Statement, and it's literally a 4-minute long word salad of this. And it's weird because each of these terms individually has some level of meaning, but when you start to throw so many of them together, it doesn't really motivate people. And the other thing that happens is people debate all of the intricacies of the word, right? I mean, fundamentally to me, I don't care if you use the word fight or not. What I care about is you picking a word that has that same level of intensity to it, that this is an injustice in the world that we're trying to solve, or this is a situation facing our customers or our stakeholders that we are helping them resolve. That level, I don't care what word you pick. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of the mission statements go wrong, is we do this offsite where we're going to write it and everybody turns into like a parliamentarian or a college English professor and debates all these little connotations. We don't need that. What we just need is, can you point to this thing in the world and say, if we don't get together and take that on, the future will not be as bright as it could be.
Wow. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I thought it was interesting in the book where you talked about Tom Bilyeu's story, which I didn't know, for Quest Nutrition, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, because I've seen this guy on Instagram. I follow him and I'm looking, I'm like, he's kind of interesting. He looks like a normal guy. And then I look, I'm like, how does this guy have 2 million followers? That's fascinating to me. So tell us about Quest Nutrition, how you found that and what their fight was and how that fits in.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, I found out about Quest Nutrition because I was invited to be on Tom's show. So he is now independent. So and I can't get a clear answer on this, but I understand the privacy reasons why not. He's no longer involved in the day-to-day, and I don't know how much of the company he still owns, but at a time he owned almost a third of Quest Nutrition and was part of that founding trio of people that grew it to be $1 billion company inside just a few short years. And the later, when the thing was sort of humming, 2016 was when I did it. He started this show, kind of sort of like a merge of TED Talks and authors at Google and all of those sort of things, but it was an interview-based show for the people at Quest and then any fans of Quest to just see, these are the people that are guiding our thinking. And I was lucky enough to get an invite, and that's how I found out about it. His story, beyond what he's doing now as a personal brand, his story is absolutely insane. Those three founders were working together, basically a data security company, like a standard kind of internet software tech company, does well, but it's not all of that inspiring or motivating. It's not fighting for anything. And Bilyeu burned out very, very quickly. He's making a ton of money, working a ton of hours, but not really seeing that sense of purpose. And so he quit. He straight up told the other two founders, I'm out. Like, you buy me out. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I can't do this anymore. And to their credit, they wanted to stick together. So they were sort of like, well, what do you mean? Let's have this larger conversation. And gradually, when he explained to them what he wanted to do, the other two came along with him. But he defined what he wanted to do basically this way. He said he wanted to save the life of his mom and his sister. Bilyeu grew up in sort of a morbidly obese family, let's say, at least clinically obese, and realized that he had conquered that and gotten his own sense of fitness and proper nutrition and that sort of thing, but saw firsthand how hard it was. And then pointed to this problem that, it's not just that there are a ton of nutritious foods out there. Let's be honest, Phil. I see your workout videos on Instagram, but let's be honest, they still don't taste all that good. And the work is still not all that fun.
Right? For sure.
And so his big idea was, let's create a company that creates foods that are healthy, but also taste good. If you've ever had a Quest protein bar, like, it's a protein bar, sure, but it's a protein bar that tastes like a Snickers bar, right?
Yep.
So the idea behind that is, if we can get stuff that actually tastes good and doesn't compromise on the quality piece, right, we can actually get people like my mom and my sister to make a healthier choice, and we can gradually get them healthier. So 2016, I was privileged to go be on his show Inside Quest. And I walked around. I was there for a whole day, even though the show was only an hour, and I talked to so many different people. And to a person, whether it was Tom or the receptionist or somebody in marketing or somebody in operations, if you ask them, like, what's Quest about? What do you do here? I didn't have this term fight yet in my mind. But if you ask them, what do you do here? To a person, they will say, we're trying to end metabolic disease. And it sort of blew my mind, because I'm like, Bull, you make a protein bar, right? Like, you make a protein bar. But they'd answer back, yes, but we make a protein bar that tastes like a Snickers bar, so that people who normally reach for a Snickers bar will reach for a protein bar, and gradually they will be healthier. And that's exactly what we're talking. Specifically in the language of Pick a Fight, I call that the ally fight, which is when you can point to, it's not necessarily your company's fight, but you can point to people who are fighting an everyday battle, like not dying from metabolic disease, when they're fighting an everyday battle, and what you do is helping them every day do that. The big key for the ally fight, though, is that you have to make sure people see it. And what I really give Tom super props to is he made it a point to embed that in the company culture, that to a employee, to a person, they all knew the answer to that. And then gradually, so I'll give you the sequel to Tom's life. It's not in the book, but the reason you see him on Instagram and all that sort of stuff is that running that TV show let him realize that there were a lot of people that needed this level of thinking about what purpose, what individual motivation, how do you change your life is about. And so the next step in saving the life of his mom and sister for him was mindset, right? So he spun off independently. But now, you know, if I were to grab his attention now and say, Tom, what are you fighting for? Actually, the line he uses is he'll say, I'm fighting to break people out of the matrix. That's his term that he's used for the way that we all sort of default into these habits of thinking that don't serve us. And he's dedicated now, his whole personal brand is about basically trying to elevate people's thinking in that regard. So again, it's a much smaller team, but now he's got a team of 15 or so people around him. And that's, again, what they're fighting for. It's another ally fight. We're fighting to help people. In this case, it's their mindset that's killing them.
Wow. Do you think, David, that might be part of the reason also that Gary Vaynerchuk is so popular on social, that he's got some bigger purpose that he's helping people achieve, even though it might not be directly related to you and I, right? It might not be appealing to us, but I think to the little guy, to the underdog, I think his story is an underdog story with a wide library.
Yeah. So real quick. So in the book, I outlined 3 different fights. The ally fight is one of them. The revolutionary fight, which is that one I was talking about with injustice, et cetera, but I forgot to say. And then another is the underdog fight. And Gary Vee is the pinnacle of that sort of underdog fight. Like, there's a reason he talks about wanting to own the Jets all the time. He's never going to own the Jets. I think he knows that, right? To him, he'll always say, no, it's about the climb, right? Because what it is the underdog fight is basically when the industry or the group of your competitors or some outside critic basically says you're not good enough or you can't do this or you're not going to achieve that. And you know they're wrong. That's actually the other key. It's a criticism, but you also need that rebuttal, right? It's not enough just to be rejected. You need to be able to rebut the rejection. But when you can prove them wrong, that fuels people. And we've known this anecdotally look, I was born in Philadelphia, right? We're the underdog city. Our greatest sports hero is a fictional character who loses a boxing match, right? That's our greatest sports hero.
It's not Santa Claus that you guys booed?
No, see, he's like, yeah. Anyway, but it's Rocky. It's that
Rocky Balboa.
Rocky loses the first fight, but what does he say to Adrian halfway through? He says, "I don't care about winning or losing. I want to go the distance because I want to prove to people I'm not a bum." Now, what we know more recently from about the last 5 or 10 years of psychological research is that same thing really is a motivating fire. There's a ton of research, most of it led by a researcher at Penn named Samir Nur Mohammed, on when you encourage people to frame their career or frame their situation as this underdog, people have criticized us and we're going to prove them wrong, you tap into some sort of internal motivation drive that just isn't there otherwise. And so, Gary Vee has built his career around that idea. First, there's the individual with Wine Library TV, and I'm doing something differently. Then VaynerMedia was that idea of like, all of the legacy advertising agencies, they're criticizing me, but they're wrong because they're ignoring digital. It seems dumb to say this in 2020, but when he started in 2010, they really were ignoring digital, and that was his big thing, right? Now he's trying to sort of convey that to individuals in this idea. And what's fascinating is that for him, it's not actually about encouraging all these other individuals to hustle and own the Tampa Bay Buccaneers while he owns the Jets. Like, he's not, but what he's saying is like, there are all of these people in your life that are saying, you can't do this, you can't build that, whatever. If you build your own thing and it only makes you $100,000 a year, $75,000 a year, but you're happy and it'll shut all those critics up, then that's winning, right? So this is sort of creating this whole generation of underdogs. Yeah,
I love it. Because as I listen to your book, I'm thinking about different brands that I know, right? Different people like that. And I can tell you, the underdog story is the same for me. My 8th grade guidance counselor told me that I should stick to easy math because I'm never going to amount to anything, right? And I knew that was BS then. I know that's BS now, but that's the key, right? You have to have something to fight against, and then you have to have that belief that in something better, that you're right and not they're right. And I really think that's important.
Yeah, and that is, and I really want to emphasize that second point, because that's the leadership imperative, right? It's not enough to just say, hey, everybody hates us or everybody thinks we're worthless, because they might be right. What you need to be able to do is point to here's why they're wrong, right? And the fascinating thing is when you can do that, you can leverage the underdog fight when you're not even the underdog. Like after the book came out, somebody forwarded me this story, and full disclosure, I am still fact checking this. But one of the things that they told me was that Nick Saban has been famous inside the locker room for basically not letting his teams at University of Alabama, which is not an underdog. Well, they're an underdog when they play my team, the Oklahoma Sooners. But other than that, they're not an underdog in basically any capacity. But what he does is he basically prevents his players from reading the stories that are predicting success and deliberately feeds them the stories of people saying they're overrated, they're not actually as talented as they think, the SEC dominance is a myth, all of these things meant to sort of fuel that, right? So even when you're on top, like you can still point to critics as long as you've got that rebuttal. And that's what's fascinating. You need a rejection and a rebuttal, but when you can get them both together, some crazy motivating things happen, and some crazy things that bond your team together happen as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole Patriots way, is that they never get too high. And we're going to see, Tom Brady is going to help the Buccaneers win the Super Bowl this year. So we're pretty excited about that here. Although, your Sooners might still beat us. Let's be clear. So,
well, I mean, that's college football, dude. I'm an Eagles fan. I actually, hang on. I do have my memento of the one time the underdog story really happened.
There you go.
But nobody expected it, man. The best strategy for Philly people is to ignore the regular season because all of our good people are going to get injured. And then if we win the first game of the playoffs, be like, oh, now I'm paying attention, right? So for most of the football season, I pay attention to OU. In fact, I forget that football happens on Saturday too, or on Sunday too. I just watch it on Saturday.
That's good strategy, David. Good strategy. You guys Oklahoma would probably beat the University of Tampa as well, but maybe not Florida. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, depending on the year, they probably would beat the Buccaneers too. So there's that.
That's a good point. Absolutely. Well, speaking of champions, so you collect these WWE belts. You got to talk about this, man, because
I collect all
this is fun, man. Right? But let's talk about the belts, man, because I
don't collect. So I have to say, I don't collect all sorts of belts. I earn most of them. So we talked about this in the last show. Let me see if I can get this. Hang on.
Yeah, let's see the belts, David.
So for the last, one of the reasons this idea of fight resonated with me so much is for the last, my entire life I've done some form of martial arts. For the last 15 or 20 years, I've done jujitsu, which the coolest thing about doing jujitsu is often their grappling competitions involve belts as opposed to medals and that sort of stuff, which is just awesome, right? I mean, it's just cool. But I also at one point, because I got into this whole thing. I don't even know where did I put it? There it is. I got into this whole thing because when I was a kid, like I love the storyline. I love the underdog narrative. I love all of it relates to almost. I see all of these through lines on why I want to write this book. But I used to love the storylines of professional wrestling. It's like soap opera with violence. What's not to love when you're a kid? I know you're the same way, right?
Yes.
So I was telling you offline that for my, and the only reason I think you're interested in this is that we talked about this in the last show with Belts We Earn. For my 35th birthday, I bought the ultimate, I think, pick a fight underdog memorabilia piece, which is
World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion belt.
And I should argue too, man, it's the Winged Eagle. Like if you are of the right age, this is the iconic belt. In fact, speaking of our underdogs, Gary Vee has one of these hanging in his office that he does the Ask Gary Vee show from and all that sort of stuff too. So that's my new, like, I'm gonna be honest. I trust you if you can recognize like who used to hold this belt and why, then I trust you. If you can't, I don't trust.
Booker T, five-time champion.
So I'll tell you, my big one was for the longest time I followed Bret Hart, and that was my big, the sort of excellence of execution, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But you appreciate the narratives, like that belt in particular was the belt at risk during the Montreal screw job. You remember that?
Yes, of course.
With Shawn Michaels as the underdog and all that sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, I think, and the reason I think this is so fascinating and I'm comfortable talking about, because I would never talk about this on HBR, for example, is that it shows you the power of that narrative, right? That way that you can frame something. I mean, fundamentally, even if you watch now, which I really don't because I'm a grown up and I have other things to do, but even as you watch now, there's more storytelling than actual wrestling going on. And that's always been the case, right? But it shows that if you know what you're doing and you know how to frame the right narrative, you really can have people on the edge of their seat. You really can have people willing to get in the ring themselves and sort of do that. There's a whole lot of power of this story. What's fascinating to me as a kid who used to love that and now trained as an organizational psychologist, is how it's sort of dovetailing now, which I didn't expect, but I am happy to, what's the right term? Happy to leverage, happy to take advantage of, happy to abuse, whatever term you want to use.
No, I think leverage is the right word. And when we think about that, I mean, really going back, right, the revolutionary fight, that was the case when we saw that Vince McMahon took over more territory. The underdog fight always happened, right? We saw the little guy against the big guy, Hulk Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant, and the ally fight, right? Sergeant Slaughter against the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, right? I mean, that was absolutely the case. So it's interesting that still comes through, David. But I got to ask, man, what's your fight?
So for me, of the three, the underdog fight is probably what motivates me the most. Some of that is, again, being from Philadelphia. But truthfully, it's just sort of the industry that we're in. Like, there are when you look at people who are the most well-known social science writers and all that sort of thing, I am not one of them, right? I was super lucky to be ranked for the last couple of years on the Thinkers 50 list of people that are influencing business, but I was ranked 48th and 46th, right? Maybe that's my version of the Jets, but I sort of thrive off of that. And truthfully, I thrive off of helping other people do that too. I think there are so many amazing voices out there that we don't hear because they don't live in one of the financial centers of the world or academic powerhouse brands or things like that. I mean, I would put you in this category, right? And I think we need to hear from way more of them. So I'm much more that underdog story when people forget about who I am, et cetera, I sort of thrive on that. Like, I was doing an interview yesterday and somebody asked me, what's the biggest obstacle you're seeking to overcome? And I said, obscurity. I mean, that's the single biggest one, right? So for me, it's a lot that underdog fight. And I mean, it's one of the reasons, to be candid, it's one of the reasons we did this book a little bit differently is, I'm not trying to take on the established players of publishing, et cetera. And people have written diatribes about how bloated and that industry is, et cetera. But to me, it was about going direct. It was about not using my traditional publisher, getting the message out there faster and doing it a little bit differently. And then feeding off of that criticism that it is not as valid because it's not this printed thing that's in Barnes and Noble and all that sort of stuff. But you know what it is? I mean, I'm trying to get this into leaders, entrepreneurs, all of those sort of people's minds. And they read with their ears now. So why not do it that way?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's brilliant that you did that. I love your resources. The fact you create a slide deck for people, a mission statement, assessment tool. I think those are fantastic. I mean, the book is less than $10 last time I looked, David. In fact, when I first saw it, it was like $4.12.
Yeah,
which is pretty crazy. Is that purposeful?
Yeah. I mean, as cheap as we can get it, right? As short as we can get. I mean, the fundamental reason, if to give you more on that underdog piece, because just to expand on that, the fundamental reason we did things a little bit differently is just to be totally candid. You're getting a first here on this interview. I pitched this idea to my traditional publisher, and they didn't want it, right? And then I kept talking to entrepreneurs, to senior leaders of. I mean, I talked to senior leaders of international organizations. They all really, really loved the idea. So I sort of said, screw it, I'll write it anyway, right? And I started writing it, and it was 20,000 words, which is like 20,000 words is what some people write as a book proposal to sell their larger book to the world of publishing.
Yeah, that's a novella almost, yeah.
Right, but the world of publishing vehemently believes that people won't buy a book unless it's 200 plus words, or the person's a Seth Godin super famous, right? So what every writer that contracts with the traditional publisher struggles with is this battle over word count, because you often don't need the number of words that they think you need the number of pages for. So I started writing it. When I realized it was 20,000 words, that was my like, oh, well, now I have a decision to make, because I can think about the idea longer and do all the things traditional publishing would want me to do to craft it in a book and then send it back to them and go, are you interested in it now? Or I could just say, forget it. Let's get this idea out there as quick as possible. And so in some ways, the format it's designed to get direct to the people who need it as fast as possible, which is audio. I mean, literally, we recorded it 2 weeks before it went live, right? Yeah. And you don't need to do as heavy copy editing when you're only doing audio. It's just, people forgive you for grammar mistakes and things like that. And I think they enjoy listening to it more. But that's just me. So it was the idea to be as direct as possible, but it was also you know what? Traditional publishing does not have the means to get this idea out as fast as possible. Now, all of this, by the way, was before the entire supply chain in America, if not the world, grinded to a halt, right? And ebooks and audio became the way most people are buying new things now. So all of that was before that. Whether or not we got lucky or unlucky, I don't know. But I know that it was a validation that going direct to the people who need this is going to work way better than running this inside this larger ecosystem of publishing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's 2.5 hours. It's a super easy read. I mean, you do a great job of storytelling. Your inflection is good. I mean, typically, I'll tell you, I'm probably in the minority where as much as often I like my friends that are authors' voices, I prefer a professional to read it.
Yeah.
And you did a great job. I mean, it's really strong, man. I can see you kind of bouncing as well when you're reading this stuff, which is really cool.
I burned a lot of calories the day that we read it. And I forgot to say kudos to Audible for also getting that and getting behind the project, because this isn't like, oh, I just went it alone entirely. Like I basically tried to sell it to them, and they understand. Like I love partnering with them on this because they understand that same idea. We need to go direct to people, and this is how people want to consume this idea. So this is going to be a way better way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's on Audible. It's fantastic. It's easy to listen to. It's easy on the ears. But David, I've got one more question. At the end of the book, you talked about you want us to join your fight. So talk to us about your fight and how we can join you.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I am fighting to make work suck just a little bit less, right? I'm motivated internally by the Underdog Fight with what I want to do in my career, but the larger fight is that revolution. I think that I think that most of us are using an outdated playbook for how we're managing and treating top talent. That was the subject of a prior book. I think I'll say this is sort of timely. I think work-life balance is actually a myth, because I think that if your work drains you, if you work with people that are toxic, you drag that home with you. It doesn't matter how many hours you spend at the office or not. We're going to experience this over the next couple of weeks, that if you are working with people that just drain you, even if you're working with them virtually, that's going to spill over into home, right? I think that people, as you said at the top, I think that people don't want to join a company anymore. Really talented people especially want to join a crusade, want to know that they have that sort of larger purpose. They want to do work that matters. They want to do work with leaders who tell them they matter. And that's the fight that I sort of recruited myself to join. And some of that is a way of framing my past decade of work as well. But it's also a way of putting down a flag or picking up a flag, whichever the better way to say it would be.
Putting it down so that we can all rally around it.
Right. And saying this is what I'm fighting for. This is what my work is going to be about in the future as well. And like I was saying with the Underdog, I would love to get as many voices behind this idea as possible to make work suck just a little bit less, and hopefully make it not suck at all. But that'll take some time. For now, let's just make it suck a little bit less.
There you go. Well, that's good, David. Well, I'm with you, man. I don't want to join a company either. I want to join a crusade. And that's what the book is all about. It's called Pick a Fight. It's David Burkus. If you're not familiar with David's work, you're missing out. Check it out. DavidBurkus.com, B-U-R-K-U-S, DavidBurkus.com. Like I said, the new book is Pick a Fight. Your goal is to not join a company, but join a crusade and pick a fight. David, it's always a treat to talk to you, man. Thank you so much.
Phil, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to chat with you.
Yeah, back at you, buddy. Thanks so much, everybody, for spending a little bit of time with me today and with David. And I hope that you choose to pick a fight. Go to davidburkus.com/fight to learn more. Have an awesome day. Thanks so much.